we can just tell them. They don't have to.
Okay, I believe all members of the public are in the meeting now, and we are good to go.
Okay, is there any public comment? I don't see any public comment in the room. Do you see any public comment online?
See, our hand raised for public comment for Rick Lania.
Okay, Rick.
Thank you. I'm not sure where we are. I see that we're 7 minutes into the meeting and I was just admitted, although I actually signed on about 4 minutes before the meeting started. So where are we on the agenda? Could you let us know that?
For a public,
Of the meeting, it took us a moment to get towards.
Okay.
do you have a public comment?
Okay, the initial public comment. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we had a background check on it. You weren't there, about you.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any public.
Pretty expensive one, right, Jeff?
I get an action to set the agenda. So
Second.
All right. Next, second, about you. Thank you. All right. San Mateo County,
Yes.
Alberton,
yes,
Belmar. Yes. Burlingame. Yes. East Palo Alto,
Yes.
San Bruno. Millbrae.
Aye.
Portola Valley,
Yes.
and motion passes. Thank you.
okay, thank you. On the chair report, welcome everybody to our first in-person meeting in what, almost 3 years.
Just about.
Big deal for us, and we'll work through the technology, although the cameras look pretty good. So, thank you, Nellie.
Thank you.
The only contentful report that I have is that the CEO Transition Subcommittee has met twice. We've approved language to go onto the website to post the CEO job description. Just to remind everyone, Jan has announced that she's retiring as of June 30th. And we're moving forward on making sure that we manage that transition properly. We're going to post a job description on the town's website for the CEO position, very similar to what Central Coast Community Energy did. And we have hired John Fernberg, who did the search for our COO and our CFO, and he's doing a downsized administrative help, extremely generous of him. He's charging us only $5,000 to do this. He will accumulate confidentially all the resumes of anyone who wants to apply for the job from the online posting, and will process them for us. And the language for the online posting, we worked through with Jan. She gave us good comments, and that's pretty much set to go. It should be posted this week. And the game plan is that on we will have a closed session at this month's board meeting where we'll talk about that. And basically the subcommittee will report to the board, take any comments and questions the members of the board have, and then we will have a public agendized item for Jan's new contract, which will be a consulting contract, which we've just begun to talk about, but we've gotten a suggestion from our legal counsel, and I think that will not be a problem to get that done. So we're moving forward, and the concept is that the job description and the posting on the website will be up until no later than the end of April. That will give us 2 months to negotiate with anyone who responds. I think we'll be in good shape. That's all I have. Is the CEO report.
Okay, I'll speak loudly. Can you hear me okay? Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you to Nellie and her team for getting everything set up here. As we all know, Nellie is awesome and everything is working seamlessly and really appreciate everything that you're doing, Nellie. Yeah. And it's great to see everyone. It's been about 3 years, I think March 16th was when we all went home, so. There was, yeah. Everyone looks exactly the same. No one has aged. In fact, everyone looks younger. Everyone looks fine.
It's that filter we have.
Jeff definitely,
Those are technology.
Yeah.
but we can't see you.
Yeah, that's why we're,
Yeah, the mask helps our skin stay nice and fresh. So we are growing, as you know, and we've got 4 new people that we're welcoming this month. Brianna, where is Brianna? She gets shot. This is Brianna, she just started last week. Welcome, Brianna. She's our new administrative assistant to help Nellie from going crazy, which is really important. So welcome, Brianna. We have Roy Shu, who is on the screen there. Roy is our new director of power resources. Today is his first day. Welcome, Roy.
Welcome, Roy.
Yay. We are very excited to have you start. He comes to us from City of Riverside Utilities. Roy, I don't know if you want to say a few words, say hello.
Sure. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Roy Shu. I am the new Director of Power Resources. Very excited to join this organization, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you and the talented staff we have under Jan's leadership, and to try to accomplish all the important goals that we set here. So I'm looking forward to working with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. The next person is Gwen Rose. Gwen isn't here today. She's starting next Monday. She is our new Director of Marketing and Community Relations, replacing KJ, who beat me out the door in her retirement. I'm going to talk to KJ tomorrow, ask her how you do it. And then we believe we have a new Human Relations Manager, Catherine Hansen. She will be starting on March 29th. So, yeah. So the only positions we have open right now are power resource analyst / specialist positions. We are planning to bring on 2 people to start and then bring on a 3rd later. So I know the power resources team is actively interviewing, and we've found some really good people who and here we are. You all are required to attend in person, so it's really nice to see you. So if you are going to attend remotely, please provide your remote address to Nellie 10 days before the meeting so that she can have that on the agenda. And then if we have an AB 2449 exemption, please let Nellie and Jen Felder, our attorney, know. And then, since we are in person here, we want to make sure that we achieve quorum. So if you can't attend, please let Nellie know so that people don't, so that if we're not going to make quorum, that we don't have everyone make a trip here for nothing. But great to see that everyone is here. I think we're missing one person, aren't we? Marty. Okay. So we have one open position on the executive committee, is that right? Yes. Okay. And to let you know, our staff policy is for staff to wear masks when they are in the offices here, including in-person meetings, so we will all be wearing masks. You are welcome to have a mask, and we have masks available if you would like them. And we also have some new EV chargers, so if you have an EV and would like to plug in when you're here, please let Nellie know. They are not public chargers, so you have to be registered in order for those chargers to work for you. So there are 8, there's 4 for the building that we used to have before, and then we put in another 4 specific for municipal communities. And if we don't have any, that's totally fine.
And of the PC one closest to
Yeah.
Alameda,
Once down there, right.
and all of them are, if you register, you get it all on the same term.
Right, they're charged for it. Next slide, please. Okay. So I'm sure you've all been aware of Silicon Valley Bank. The failure of the bank last week. And so of course we've been trying to figure out, do we have any exposure to that? Our bank is First Republic Bank. So we found that our bank deposits are guaranteed beyond the FDIC insurance as a public agency. So we do not, our funds that we have at First Republic are not at risk. And we do not, 250. It's 105%. Well, I'll let Christina speak to that. As far as Silicon Valley Bank, we don't have any exposure to them. None of our counterparties use Silicon Valley Bank as a counterparty. We have no holdings of them in our investment portfolio and will continue to monitor. We do use Bill.com, which is slightly, has a little bit of exposure to Silicon Valley Bank. And Christina, can I ask you to please weigh in here on what the deal is with Bill.com and also what the insurance is for our funds that we have in the bank?
Sure. The top line takeaway is, since PCE as a governmental agency must operate under the state California government code, so any of our bank deposits that are held are guaranteed in that they're collateralized. So First Republic Bank, our operating bank, has collateral amounts that cover PCE's deposits as well as of their governmental agency deposits, with a letter of credit with the Federal Home Loan Bank of California. So that's one big picture takeaway. To the point that Jan had made around Bill.com, we make payments to our vendors through Bill.com. Bill.com as an organization has about 10% of its holdings at Silicon Valley Bank. However, Bill.com has assured all of its clients that it is able to make payments through Bill.com. One of the items of note here is when PCE makes payments, 90+ % of our payments are for energy products. And typically those are made directly via wire transfer from our PCE First Republic account and doesn't go through the Bill.com kind of holdings and payments. So there is some exposure in Bill.com. However, over the weekend, the feds did say that they would make all of their customers at Silicon Valley Bank whole over and above the FDIC insurance. So as far as PCE's exposure on vendor payments through Bill.com, we're just monitoring and making sure that if any end vendors have bank accounts with Silicon Valley Bank, we're just making note of that. Overall, our safety of PCE funds, given the guarantee of our active bank deposits, is very strong. And then as far as overall exposure to Silicon Valley Bank, it is very, very minimal, if any. Let me pause there and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Christine.
Do you have any
I
question?
have a question on that, which is that this is one of the reasons that we moved so much of our money out of just sitting in a bank account, like a checking account, and moved it into actively managed, because those assets are held in custody for us in our name. I think State Street's our custodian. I can't call the custodian with PFM, but
Some is at PFM, some is at First.
right, and splitting it into two, that's another, like, diversifying our banking, getting it all out of a big checking account that was only insured to whatever, and moving it into sort of an active management situation, are all risk reduction. policies that we pursued, and right now we're seeing why those were good policies to pursue. So thanks very much, Jan, for, being so open to that when we started it. And also, everybody thinks there's no risk in a bank account. Well, it doesn't have zero interest, and we've lost a little money as interest rates have risen in some of our short-term fixed income portfolios. But, we will recapture those as rates go up, but you can see that risk, then it's managed in other ways, and diversification is so important, and holding those securities directly as opposed to as bank deposit, really does reduce some of the risk for us. So thank you.
Thank you, Don, for so fearlessly leading our audit and finance committee, and thank you, Carlos, making sure that we have been fiscally sound.
Let me just add to that, make a comment really. I think that what we've seen in the last few days with Silicon Valley Bank should give everyone who has any money management responsibility tremendous pause.
Yeah.
And it's not about Silicon Valley Bank. I mean, there's issues about Silicon Valley Bank, but this isn't about Silicon Valley Bank. This is about what happens when interest rates rise quickly and the banking industry is impacted by that, which is tremendous impact, particularly on investments in bonds and securities that are locked into a certain interest rate when those interest rates change. And we have a lot of money. So I think for us, the critical thing is diversification. We can't predict the future, but we can make sure we protect ourselves and our customers as best possible. So I'm sure that when the finance committee meets next, it'll take a harder look at diversification, but really, I think the critical takeaway for all of us is diversification is absolutely in our interest.
Rick,
Yeah, go.
can I just ask, what is the size of our capital at this point? Republic Bank?
Maybe Christina.
Could we repeat the question closer to the mic? I'm sorry.
Sir, what is the size of the capital that we have right now in First Republic Bank? All accounts, whether it's a lockbox, whatever it is. Do we know?
Roughly.
Rough.
Sure. We roughly in our checking, our operating, and our savings account, currently we have $40 million. I'm rounding and I'm guessing from my last look, but can be more specific. And we'll also go into a finance presentation that we can look at least the actuals from Q2. So that's our operating picture. And then we have our investment managers that are diversified between two investment managers, First Republic Bank and then also PFM, and then held in trust with US Bank. So definitely the big picture takeaway of diversification is represented in terms of where our accounts are, who's managing, as well as our policies and procedures in terms of investments and how much we're allowed to invest in particular names.
So just to be clear, I think Christina, when you referenced US Bank, the First Republic Bank investments are held by US Bank.
Right.
Yeah, that's our custodian, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was, they know who it was this.
I'm sorry, when is finance meeting again?
The 8th, right?
May.
I think it would make sense to actually have a meeting before me. Look, is there systemic risk? I don't know. There's $110 billion in FDIC money. It's being used to backstop this, right? That's not enough money. If a number of these banks that have been called into question of First Republic is one, to make everybody whole. So I am worried that indeed some high-tech investors are going to start saying, hey, you need to pull your money out of First Republic because, we need to get, the remaining piece of the FDIC $110 billion pot that they're using to backfill non-FDIC insured stuff. And so I don't know whether it makes sense for us to really I think it might be helpful. I don't know. Donna, you're the chair.
So I think, so I've been following this really closely, including, talking to First Republic Bank. And, I think they're structurally a different banking situation than SVB because of, both the depositors and, their depositor base versus the other depositor base, and also their collateralization. And I'm not, having read over the weekend a lot, and I actually personally have a lot of my money in there too, so obviously a lot of us probably do, because it's a common bank that we all use. So I haven't been as concerned about that. I think what the question really is how much do we have an exposure above the $250,000 cross, the collateralized. So we have $250,000 with FDIC. You're saying that because we're a governmental agency, that we have a higher level of we're collateralized at 100 and some odd percent, 105%. And then a lot of those securities we own directly, right? So even if the bank failed, if it's custodied at US Bank, we would just, if we had fired the bank, we would just terminate the banking relationship, keep the custodied securities and hire another manager over it, right? So I think that's where we need to understand is the deposits.
Right, I think whatever cash deposits we have, right.
Uninsured cash
That are-
deposits.
And that are not securities that are being held either in intermediary or with the intermediary or.
Yeah.
That, so that 105% collateralization, 105% of what?
Of what?
Of our.
Of our deposits, it's 105% of our cash deposits. So whatever we have in our bank deposits with any of our banks is collateralized per California governmental code.
Now, that doesn't mean that we couldn't lose more than that, because clearly what happened here was they were holding, Silicon Valley Bank was holding 10-year, 15-year treasuries. When the interest rate rose in those levels and devalued that,
Right.
we could be collateralized at 105%, and then overnight rates rise, and all of a sudden they would have to re-collateralize it. The next day, they'd have to remark to
Because they
market.
would mark to market.
Yeah, so that's.
Also, the collateral could be a bond that.
Collateral is usually a treasury,
Yeah.
it's usually a treasury, it's usually sort of. Yeah, it's something, so, okay, so where the volatility, if you could hold them to term, they wouldn't lose value, right? They would still be 105% if you held them to term.
Yeah.
The problem becomes when you have people wanting money out of the bank today,
Oh, yeah.
and you have a 15-year term, you're mismatched with your liabilities and your assets. See, that's where I got into crazy. So when people start asking for money, they have 15-year bond that had devalued quite a bit,
Yeah.
and that's where it got.
Just order of magnitude, how much had 50 years T-bills actually dropped in value?
I'd have to look,
10%?
Oh, huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm more than that.
Really?
Oh, huge.
Well, rates.
So if they're at 2.5, you get 5 now, or 4.
Oh, I know.
Right, so you just,
80% of book value.
It's a function of interest rate change. But they interest rates.
Yeah, I thought all that, yeah.
I'm wondering, I think this is really good, and fascinating by hearing just the minds talking. I think I agree though with, Director, let's maybe have the finance, folks speak before May, let's agendize it. It's a big enough deal that I think folks probably want to hear this too. Just to kind of, well, maybe have VP agenda, but also I think it's still.
I think it would be good, Director Bates, excuse me for interjecting here, but is if we, maybe Carlos, you and I can chat with Christina and Jan and Sean, come up with sort of an agenda. And it's almost like the report out would be almost like an informational report to the board as to how our system works. We have a lot of new board members.
Yes.
What our risk management is, what our investment policy and the guidelines are, and it would just be kind of more of a report out to make people feel comfortable about what we're doing, as well as the evaluation of any potential risk exposure we would have. And understanding the difference between
the stuff, the assets that we hold in custody versus, what is on bank deposit and commingled with others and at risk above the FDIC. So the FDIC will insure at 250, but we, even though we're collateralized at 105, we still could lose if the collateral was revalued at, say, 80%.
I think that's a great idea. I love holding it to the new members too, because I bet new board members, this is the finance part is huge.
Well, and today we have the mid-year financial review, and that's gonna have some implications, and I'm sure that will come up at our March board meeting. So I think this would be absolutely appropriate to include when we have that financial report at the board meeting to go through the issues resulting from the banking situation, just as Donna laid out. Okay, Andrew.
Yeah, so on the slides there, it says State of California Government Code section, they sort of put a little mandate. Is it mandating the financial institution to collateralize any deposit from a qualified governmental agency? Is that what that code says? Because obviously California code does not regulate FDIC.
Christina, did you hear that question? And can you
I
respond?
did. I believe it's a question as to what is the requirement, and it is governmental code that requires governmental agencies deposits to be collateralized at that amount. And I see Jennifer's hand raised up.
Yes, Jennifer.
Yes, I think it would make the most sense to agendize this, given the robustness of the conversation for a future meeting, given that it's not on the current agenda and this is part of the CEO report.
Yeah, okay.
We can talk about it.
So we will plan to have an agenda item on the board meeting for March in a couple weeks to go over this, and maybe we can bring in our financial partners. Maybe we can have someone from First Republic Bank and someone from PFM also address the board to let us know. Yeah, so I got really worried about this over the week. I said, what? Yeah, more than $250,000.
Yeah.
Right, so we will do that, and then following that, if it's a need for a special meeting of the audit finance committee to dig into it further, we will do that. But we'll go ahead and have a meeting ahead of time, Donna, as you suggested with you and Carlos, Christina, Sean, and I, as to exactly how we might want to structure that agenda item for the board meeting.
And Jen, sorry, and if we can bring in the financial partner to sort of brief us on it, would be also helpful to get an understanding what other governmental agencies that they're working with and how they stay in compliance based on the governmental code. You're not sure we're not the only one, as a governmental agency.
Yeah,
That are
that's for sure.
banking with them as well.
Yeah, and I think that's super important, Anders, because there is a difference between being FDIC insured and collateralized at 105%.
Right.
Talk to anybody who, that it's like, what's called, like breaking the box, Rick, on a mutual fund. So like you can be at 105, but you come down, you're gonna,
Well,
yeah,
let's have, per Jen's comment, let's address it at the board.
yeah, that's fine.
Okay, let's move on. Oh, is there more on the CEO report?
That's all I have. Happy to answer any other questions that you might.
Okay, well, it's a very easy transition. We're now moving into the financial report.
Christina will be presenting this.
That was very intentional. See the smooth handoff there to this discussion here at our executive committee meeting. This is an update on PCE's performance through Q2, so July 1, 2022 through December 31, 2022 of the current fiscal year. There are 3 sections to this discussion. The first will be a discussion on our performance compared to budget through Q2 of the current fiscal year. The second portion of this presentation will be what are we projecting for the remainder of the year as far as our year-end financial position with the information that we know and our best adjustments to the remainder of the fiscal year. And then the third section of this discussion is well, given what we know of performance through Q2, what are things that we should keep in mind as we enter into budget season? And what are the tools that we as PCE have to address budget variances as the year progresses? Let's go to the next slide, please. So starting from the top, really looking at, well, what are we selling in terms of energy? What's our actual versus budget load performance as it relates to our sales? Our sales reported here are in kilowatt hours. Total big picture, our loads year to date are 1.3% below budget through the end of December of 2022, so halfway through the year. If you break that down further into commercial and industrial loads, they are just at budget. And then our residential loads are 4% below what was budgeted through halfway into the fiscal year. Let's move on to the next slide. So moving from our loads that we're selling, translating that into revenues, this is a picture of our year-to-date actual revenues versus budget and a monthly trend. So you have the monthly trend of actuals compared to the budget over the last 13 months. And towards the bottom of the chart on the right-hand side, you have the month-by-month breakout, revenue actuals compared to revenue budget by month in the current fiscal year. The total takeaway halfway into the year is that our year-to-date revenues are $5.4 million below budget, or 2% under our year-to-date budget. And again, flipping back to our load performance, really driven by our residential loads coming in under budget. Let's flip to the next page. So moving from revenues to expenditures, most of our expenses are cost of energy. And this is a breakout of our cost of energy expenses by month over the last 13 months, where we're comparing our actual monthly expenditures in energy compared to our monthly budgeted expenditures in energy. And you can see again at the bottom half of the chart on the right is our month-by-month breakout of energy expenses compared to budget in the first half of the fiscal year. The overall takeaway is that our year-to-date energy expenses are $13 million over budget, or 9% over our year-to-date budget. And you can see that the months of September and December were the highest unfavorable variances from budget. Let's flip to the big picture zoom out. So just want to spend a little bit of time to orient ourselves to what's here on the screen, which is the total picture of our fiscal year 22-23 actual versus budgeted performance. So on the top half of the chart, we have our operating revenues. And going from left to right, the first middle portion of the chart shows our year-to-date performance in the current fiscal year. So 6 months of actuals showing operating revenues at $215 million compared to our budgeted year-to-date expectation of $220.6 million. So big picture takeaway, $5.4 million under budget on our revenue side. Then moving down into the middle of the chart, we're looking at operating expenses and how they're broken up by categories. Overall, our cost of energy is about $13 million over budget, as we had looked at the detail month over month in the prior slide. And we have savings in all of our other cost categories. If you go down, oops, so sorry, Siri is trying to jump into our conversation. If you go further down, you can see our actual operating income of $47 million, $47.6 million before non-operating expenses, that little line below, compared to our budgeted expectation 6 months into the year of $61.9 million. There's a line here that other operating expenses are factored into, which is appropriate given our conversation around our PCE overall financial position. In this line, we have unrealized losses and gains. So we show what our losses and gains may be in one of the subline items here on non-operating income and expenses related to investment portfolio experience. So in this line, we have a $548,000 expenditure. Budget year to date, we're expecting around $300,000 positive there. The very bottom line shows our change in net position. So given our year-to-date actuals, we have a change in net position of $47 million to the good. Our budgeted expectation 6 months into the year would be a change in net position of $62 million. So big picture takeaway, we're producing a $47 million positive, a change in net position. It's a little bit lower than what we had projected for our budget halfway into the year. And we've highlighted kind of the two drivers, revenue underperformance in the first 6 months related to loads, and then higher cost of energy expenses. Let me pause there for a moment.
Yeah.
Actually,
I have a question, Christina. So it's not the major issue on the page, but the number that jumps out at me is the difference in non-operating expense versus expectation of revenue. That expense was way more than we expected. What is that about?
It's unrealized losses for the most part, and those are paper losses. This can be part of our larger, I'm making note of what is a good orientation for our overall financial picture. And there are a number of items in the non-operating income, one of them being unrealized losses as well as realized losses. So
Unrealized losses, those are interest rate sensitive investments that have changed in their principal value because of the interest rate changes. Is that right?
There are changes in our investment portfolio value that have not yet been realized, in that we track, what is our investment portfolio at this point in time and how does it change over time, but they're not recorded until we're selling and we're posting what is our actual losses or gains versus our paper losses or gains. Again, I'm kind of making note of what is the overall education that we should have as an organization on our financial picture. But while you're pointing out that variance compared to budget is larger than we had expected, when you look at the sum of our overall financial picture, definitely a small portion of it. And again, caveating that we're halfway into the fiscal year, there's another 6 months to get to actuals, and really trying to pay attention to what are these variances, what are the drivers, and how do we best budget for them on a moving forward basis so that we have good news kind of all around.
Any other questions, Donna?
So as this is a mid-year budget review, does it make sense, and if we kick step back to the finance committee, that we revise the budget mid-year or not? Do we want to make adjustments? I know that in one of our city councils, we make mid-year budget reviews and we make adjustments, and we know some things. We know interest rates are rising, we know markets are volatile, we know we're probably not going to have 300,000 positive return on our investment portfolio this year. So making an adjustment into the budget might make sense. Not necessarily here today, but that could be part of our meeting, Carlos, when we have it, is to make recommendations to revise the budget.
Yeah, we have discussed that internally. The budget that you passed was actually an expense budget, but you allowed us a certain amount of expenses.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked, Christina and I have talked about coming to the board. Are we doing that in March, Christina, to ask for a budget change, or is that planned for April?
It would most likely be in April because we'll have at least 2 additional months of actuals to factor into our projections for year end.
Yeah. And as she goes along, looking at what the rest of the year looks like, the picture changes considerably.
Carlos?
Yeah, so Christina, I just wanted to confirm that the $850,000 is indeed unrealized losses. And for that financial committee report, could we please get from our custodians a trade sheet? So I really do want to understand whether these are just paper losses or whether we've rebalanced the portfolio and actually lost money. So which we in other organizations and entities that I am on, there has been that actual loss. We have rebalanced our portfolio and lost $750,000, and it was made public, and we understand this. So I just want to make sure that we can see from our custodians and are we using PFM? Who are we using? Yeah, if we get their trade sheet. Thanks.
Thank you.
Just a comment on the budget adjustment issue. I mean, from my city council, we have a midterm review and we make adjustments, but where we make adjustments is not based on overall assumptions. We make adjustments because basically there's an expense change. And there's some expense that comes up that's significant that we hadn't counted on, and we have to approve that additional expense in order to allow it. So we make a mid-year adjustment every year, but we don't change, we're not having finance spend the time to redo its whole level of assumptions. It's just approving that expense adjustment. And I mean, if that's appropriate at PC, we should do it, but my guess is, I mean, we're not, our big expense is the cost of power. So it's, I mean, that's a fluctuation that we're always gonna be subject to. When I look at the assumptions, I think coming within 2% of the revenues is a really good budgeted amount. So I think that's very conservative, and we missed on the expense side, and I agree with Carlos that if that $548,000 loss is because we have, for example, some long-term security that is subject to a low interest rate, and our intention is to hold that maturity to when it matures, then that's just a paper loss and it's never going to be realized because we're going to get the benefit of that small return we counted on. But if you have to sell that, and if you're readjusting, as Carlos suggested, just because you've got some balance that you've got to do, then you may sell that before maturity, in which case you incur the loss. And obviously that's what happened to SVB.
Cool.
Yeah, Don.
And there also, you have to remember, we're selling securities that might be earning 2% to move into securities that are earning 5%. So they're turning the portfolio over and estimating, does that realized loss get made up by the higher earning interest rate return on the security that they're changing into? So, and remember, our portfolio is I don't think we go out longer than 5 years. I think this is a very short-term bond only portfolio. It doesn't include equities, and it doesn't include, because the other way you could have lost money on a banking situation like SVB is if you owned in your portfolio the equity shares, or if you owned the bonds and the company goes bankrupt and the bondholders are even eaten away. So we didn't own that, like that's not how I think we checked on that. but that's how we would incur a realized loss, is an active manager changes out of securities and moves us away from something they think is risky into something they think is less risky with a higher return. And we should review that, Carlos, I think it would work, so people understand how active management works.
Yeah, what the positive change we've made with regard to that, which I see is now being implemented. So when we first started, we had to have the lockbox at Wilmington because our power suppliers wanted to make sure they got paid first. So we're done with all of that, with the lockbox. We've got plenty of money, but all of our deposits from PG&E were going into Wilmington. And we had a setup with them that we could sweep their once a month. And sometimes we do it twice a month or 3 times a month, but it wasn't like automatic. So there were times, especially during the September heat wave, where ISO was requiring us to significantly increase our deposits for them, where we maybe had to sell some of our investments without sufficient cash to meet their collateral costs. We have now changed it so that the deposits are coming in daily to our First Republic Bank. We're done with Wilmington, and I see, Christina, it looks like maybe 2 days worth of deposits have gone directly into our bank at First Republic, so we will no longer have any kind of cash squeeze because the money is coming in daily. We get, significant amount of points each day of our customers are paying. So there should be less need in the future to dip into our investments if there is another heat wave or a need for us to quickly post collateral at the ISO or whatever.
So just to answer Rick's question, the S&P 500 US Treasury 10-year index as at 3/10/23 was down 11.15 for the year, 6.41 annualized for 3-year, and flat at almost 0.57 for the 5-year. Did you?
So that's 11% for this year.
3/30 as of 3/10/23.
Yeah,
So
so
1 year trailing.
a little over 2 months.
No, calendar year, one full year. Year to date, it's 2.2 negative.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
We can go on to the next slide, and we've talked about this already. Bottom line takeaway, change in net position is healthy, however, under our budgeted expectation. Let's go on to the next slide, which is given what we know today. Oh, I'm sorry, cash position, very important. So given our cash and investments at the end of December 31, 2022, our days cash on hand is almost 220 days of cash on hand, days of operations on hand, above our approved board policy of 180 days. Let's go to the next slide, and this is the next section, which is we had a rate change February 1, and including that rate change and applying it for the remainder of the fiscal year, as well as adjustments based on some of our observations of what has happened in actual performance in the first half of the year. What do we think this will mean for our year-end projections? Let's move on to the next slide, please. So in words, our rate change went into effect February 1. That's projected to generate a $57 million positive variance in revenues when compared to the adopted budget. The rate change underpins a change in net position of $114 million, or $40 million more than the original budget. Change in net position of $74 million. And we'll flip to what does this look like in numbers? But in words, one of the additional things that we've incorporated into projections for the fiscal year end, the current fiscal year, is our actual performance as you've seen it in the slides preceding. And then a load forecast adjustment for budgeting purposes, where we are essentially modeling out what residential loads being down 4% compared to budget for the remainder of the year, and then commercial and industrial loads being at budget or 0.82% above budget for the remainder of the fiscal year. And then our cost of energy expenses forecasted to be above budget for the second half of the fiscal year, just again, given what we've seen very broadly of the first half performance. And so let's flip to the next slide here. So given all of those assumption changes and adjustments, what would be our projected forecast for the end of the fiscal year, the current fiscal year? We have an overall change in net position that's forecasted to be $114 million at the end of the fiscal year, compared to the budgeted option of $74 million. Again, driven by that rate change in February, and then also factoring into account cost of energy if cost of energy continues to be above budget at the same rate that we've seen in the first half of the year. Very simply. Let me pause here and answer any questions. Then with this pause, there are two things that I'm going to circle back to, which are, the discussion around is a mid-year budget update, something that we'll think about. So given what we know to date and some adjustments, our projection for year end is a change in that position of $114.4 million. All again, subject to change, but given what we know and adjustments that we can factor in. This last part of the presentation is very much a tee-up to future audit and finance discussions, as well as executive committee and board discussions. Let's flip to the next slide, please. So really just discussing a framework for budget variances. On a quarterly basis at Audit and Finance, we provide the variance reporting, what are our actuals compared to budget, and we keep these in mind as we develop the upcoming budget. Really important for us to think about, well, what tools do we currently have to address variances that are positive or negative when we look at actuals compared to budget, and what are some tools that we can think about exploring. Let's go to the next slide, please. So a couple themes, if you will, when thinking about budget variances, key considerations, timing is a key consideration. When do we put together our budget? What are our assumptions, and how might those actually change over time given actual performance? And how do we track that on an ongoing basis? What's the nature of that variance? Is it positive or negative when we have actuals compared to budget? And are they positive or negative on the revenue side or on the expenditure side? Are they one-time or are they structural? All of the things that we think about and incorporate into our next year's budget development and adoption and four-year projection thereafter. We have various tools to address these variances. And what tools do we currently have, and what else can we think about developing and exploring to address variances as time passes? Let's go to the next slide. So budget variances and timing. We're here talking about our performance mid-year. So it's March. We have performance through December of the current fiscal year. And we are starting our budget development internally at PCE, with budget adoption coming to the board in June typically, and budget development views at a board meeting before then, as well as Audit and Finance Committee meetings before then. This annual budget is adopted every year, and then there's a four-year projected look of financial projections that also get adopted every June. And again, we provide a snapshot in time of our projected revenues and expenses for the next 12 months and our best estimate of what that looks like for 4 years thereafter. And those assumptions are based on forecasted loads, forecasted rates, and the fundamental basis of our expenditure projection is driven by cost of energy. Again, a point in time view that's assessed at a quarterly variance reporting period and reported out to the board and various committees. Let's go to the next slide. Just discussing a little bit, breaking out these variances. Are they on the revenue side? Are they on the expenditure side? Are they favorable or unfavorable? On the revenue side, our actuals compared to budget drivers are rates, the PG&E generation rate assumptions, our PCIA rate assumptions, and our load forecast. What are the assumptions that underlie that budget when they're adopted at that point in time in June? And then we track it thereafter. On the expenditure side, or cost of energy, there's significant market price fluctuations that may be seasonally or weather driven, and other external factors that swing, that have swung pretty significantly. And then again, tying back to, should we mid-year adjust? Our ability to expend the budget at a pace that was projected is also something that we see on those expenditure variances. And then switching over to thinking about the nature of the variances. Are they one time? Can we handle it given the tools that we have in place? Are they structural? If they're one time or structural, how do we shift our underlying assumptions? And if we do, when do we do that? And how do we do that? How do we communicate that internally and externally? And again, kind of communicate that out in our financial documents and reporting. And then the last slide is really a listing out, if you will, of our tools to address variances. We currently do regular variance reporting, where we're reporting on our operating performance, we're reporting on our cash position. We factor in budget contingencies. We can and have done mid-year budget adjustments. We do multi-year financial forecasting. So in each annual budget, we have a 4-year forecast. We implement rate changes. We have a rate, we can establish a rate stabilization fund. We can think about rate setting framework that may be different from what we have in place today. We do have a healthy cash position where our days cash on hand exceeds our policy minimums. And I'll stop there and come up for air and just know that we've been thinking and acting and discussing budget variances in our budget development internally. And, we'll just pause for now and see if there's any questions or comments.
Well, I'll make one comment. I think one thing that you didn't include on the prior slide under rates, which is the third significant thing under rates, it's not just what PG&E's generation rate is, it's what our chosen discount is from PG&E's rate. That has a significant impact on our revenue.
Yes.
I think that, given that we're looking at generating even more net cash than we had expected because of the rate change that occurred in January, I think we ought to look at, when we look at this as a board, we ought to look at what some options are for changing that discount. Because we're not a bank, we've already got more cash than we have set as policy that we need in terms of days of operations. And we've watched other CCAs in the last few months significantly increase their discounts, going from 1% to 4%. I think we ought to look at what the impact would be on us of increasing our discount by 1%, 2%, and 3%, so that we have some framework of what that looks like.
I support that, yeah.
Donna?
Also, we don't call out on the revenue side the PPIA, but I think under those points, when we're thinking about budget, that definitely has to be, Jen and I talked about this, it's just, even though it's not that transparent through to the, those who might be the public looking at the budget, because it's encompassed in the thing, but it's another clearly significant component of our rate.
Yeah.
Impact.
I just want to add to what I said, that, I think that's the thing to look at, is the discount, because that returns to our customers what we're taking from them in a way that we can manage. And I think what Christina said in thinking about making any change, we have to think about this in terms of whether it's, the cause of it is temporary or structural. That's really important. The other thing that we haven't done as a load serving entity is independently set rates other than the discount from PG&E. And at some point, and I'm not advocating that, I'm just observing that. The one thing that has been raised is because of the PUC's change from NEM 2 to NEM 3, which, as we know, is highly controversial. We have the ability to independently address that issue. We don't necessarily have to adopt what they've decided to do. We get the right to set the rates wherever we want. So that might be something I think it's appropriate to talk about it. I don't know if we should change it, but I think it's appropriate to have a discussion at some point about that. And I'm not advocating that we necessarily do that now, although I think we should raise it to the board and see if people would like to do that now. I would like to see the impacts on us over the next fiscal year if we were to increase the discount by 1%, 2%, or 3%.
Well, the chair, when you mentioned that, if it's structural versus temporary, would that mean that maybe we would increase the discount if it was temporary? We would have look into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should, if it was totally temporary, yeah. I mean, this is.
So we have a lot of flexibility with adjusting the rate.
We
We don't have to do it forever.
Right, we have total control. But we want to be sensitive because we don't want them
Yeah,
to just
discount.
wildly change
Yeah.
one way and then the other.
In response to your comment about independently setting our rates, for PG, we are in the process of starting a rate study, to look at the cost of service. How much does it cost for us to serve our different types of customers, so that we can have the data needed if we were to use ones that are.
Right.
It's gonna take a while, it's like a year long. We'll start.
So just to clarify, if I may, the reason we're realizing or we're budgeting for this additional $40 million in revenue is because of the reduction in the PCIA this year, correct?
Yes.
That doesn't mean that that PCIA remains low in the future, correct?
Exactly.
Right, yeah, so, you know, should we be viewing this as a one-time windfall, or, you know, should we be saying it's structural thing, I'm sorry?
Yeah, there was also a increase in the PG&E generation rate. So, I mean, it really is impacted by three things. It most significantly by the reduction in the PCIA, that's right. But also there was an increase in the PG&E generation rate, and we've maintained our 5% discount. Those are the three things.
And then I think I'm sorry, Christina, go ahead.
I was going to jump in and say, like, you know, of note, further discussions around the components of our rate structure, I think is definitely fundamental for all of us, because there has been tremendous rate volatility, PG&E wise, on gen rates, on PCIA, and the rate at which those portions of rates have changed over time. So we're setting our budget based on rates that PG&E sets, the discount that we have set our rates to beat and provide that 5% discount. So, thinking about one-time and structural and quantifying that when we're looking at our budgetary choices is definitely something that I'm envisioning in this budget discussion process, so that we don't just have one snapshot in time, but we also understand what's our tolerance for sensitivity, negative or positive, when we have variances from budget that will always be. So again, thinking about the tools and what we can act on and what makes the most financial sense, dimensioning that out for our discussion, I think is very important.
But Carlos, your question, the PCA is essentially zero right now. And I think last year was 3 or 4 cents.
Mhm.
So that difference is now coming to us.
Right.
No difference to the customer, they're paying the same amount, but the amount that comes to us is different. And yeah, is that structural? Probably not, that's probably a one-time change, and it went down because energy prices went, up. So they all,
Right, sure, yeah,
a
that
lot of
equation.
pieces to the puzzle and how they fit together,
But,
so.
yeah, but there's other issues related to the PCIA, because included in the PCI would be highly negative right now if we weren't still paying off Diablo Canyon. And beginning next year, that changes to our benefit, because the PCI goes away with respect to half of that Diablo Canyon obligation next year, and it goes away totally in 2025. So there's change, this positive change to us coming. We don't know what negative change there might be, but there's positive change that we know is gonna come in those next 2 years.
And if I just may say one other question about when we go back and actually analyze or discuss how we want to deal with this, what I will call for now a windfall. I do think, given the context of our DIA work, what does equity mean? What does a, $10 rebate mean to somebody who's making $30,000 a year compared to, and it's not a rebate, a reduction in your bill, someone who is, making far more. So I think that is a discussion that needs to get factored in to, is it across the board, 1 cent, 2 cents, with 1 cent, 1%? I think given that the organization has embraced that paradigm, I think we should then factor it in.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, Christina, let's move on.
Thank you.
I think she's done.
Oh, are you done?
Yeah. So we'll now turn to Blake, I believe, who's gonna be doing the discussion on the building electrification strategy. And Blake, we're running pretty long here, so as we usually recommend, 10 to 15 minute presentation, if it's possible.
I don't mean to interrupt. This is Jen. I just want to make sure that we have welcome public comment for the last agenda item. I didn't hear that.
Yeah, thank you, Jen, that's right. On the financial agenda item, is there any public comment? There's no public comment in the room, and we don't have any public comment online. Okay, thank you, Jen. Let's move on to the building electrification strategy update.
Sounds good. Can everyone hear me well?
Yeah.
My name is Blake Hirschaft. I'm the Building Electrifications Programs Manager. Per Jan's recommendation, I'll try to go through this pretty quickly. What we're bringing to you here today is the program's perspective of what our future building electrification programs will look like. We're calling it Building Electrification version 2. And this is from years of learnings from the program team, things we've heard during city council meetings, and then also outreach to stakeholders and our Citizens Advisory Committee. I'll briefly go through the 2035 decarbonization analysis findings and takeaways, our vision for building electrification version 2, and then how that relates to the home upgrade program and the current home upgrade program status. So this is the programs portfolio that we generally present. In the programs team, we deal with distributed energy resources, buildings, and transportation. Right now, this is really focused on buildings and specifically existing buildings is what I'll be talking about in this presentation. The 2035 decarbonization analysis, which we took on last year, came out with a primary scope for buildings, knowing that we can't boil the ocean. Focus there is residential, single family, and small multifamily, as well as office and small commercial. We believe large commercial and large multifamily are either covered more by other resources or are one-off in the case of industrial and large commercial, so not as replicable. But we will still support there. It's just not our primary scope. Our takeaways from the 2035 were that programs needs to be providing flexible incentives for many measures, including pre-wiring and panel upgrades, that we need to provide high-touch support, including a one-stop shop or a hotline, and that links to financing are needed. It seems like there's a lot of help needed in the market, both on the financing side and on the technical assistance side. So I will go through what we're envisioning. As background, what we have now, we have the zero interest loan up to $10,000 paid back on bill over up to 10 years, heat pump water heater and heat pump HVAC rebates. And we also have the home upgrade program, which was just extended. There was just a contract amendment included so that we can hit more homes. That's a low income direct installation program. Some needs, as discussed before, a program that provides incentives, but our current program provides incentives, but minimal guidance and support. Our upgrading program needs to address barriers customers are facing, including comfort with adopting existing building reach codes is really important to us. We want to make sure that there's enough support there that city councils can consider existing building reach codes in the future. And during meetings on this topic and over the last year, there are clearly some gaps there. Customers are facing challenges, including lack of clear information, technical complexity, and emergency replacements, specifically of water heaters and HVAC, seem to be a major issue that we would like to help with. There are many types of customers, but some buckets for this part of the discussion that we've been thinking of are customers that are either doing DIY or want to choose their own contractors, which is a lot of how the incentives that we offer right now work. Customers that would just like it done, that would like a number where they can call it and don't necessarily care which contractor is doing the work. And then customers who can't afford the work is very important to us, as discussed in the home upgrade program. Where we would need to cover the entirety of the installation. So these are the major items we're looking into. Having retail partnerships, whether that be helping with bulk purchasing, developing the supply chain, potentially having some sort of brick and mortar presence. A one-stop shop website, which includes education, potentially an appliance marketplace like Silicon Valley Clean Energy has. A hotline that people can call for assistance that can help with program navigation, project planning, and technical guidance. A turnkey installation option, which we offer now within home upgrade, but it's very limited. That would include appliance installations, bulk purchase discounts, an emergency loaner program, and pre-wiring assistance. Also financing options, PC financing, or potentially a conduit to third-party financing. I have in here throughout that we'll be leveraging load shaping, PV, and storage to make sure that there's cost savings as we move toward electrification. And then at the bottom, there's a variety of rebates from federal to local level that we want to continue to leverage. The immediate needs, I'll note the color coding here. Blue is an RFP that we would like to go through this year. Gray is future PCE scope, and green, including these light green boxes, are PC internal processes that might not necessarily be performed by a contractor. We really want to focus on getting the one-stop website out this year, working through the hotline as part of an RFP process, as well as a turnkey installation RFP. which we've been working through heavily. And then looking into financing options, and we're working on load shaping now. So our first priorities are the one-stop shop, turnkey installation, and a hotline. And something we've been noticing, we already have the turnkey installation through our home upgrade program, the low income program that does one electrification measure. This year through the contract amendment, we're going to do 5 whole homes. And we've realized that if we can grow that program and have a robust program, we may be able to leverage it for turnkey for maybe a cost share component that's non-low income. If the home upgrade program is big enough, we'll have a dedicated workforce, which means our projects, which are relatively small to electricians and plumbers, can get more prioritization. Also, that workforce will be experienced in whole home electrification, which is a bit of a gap at the moment. We will also hope to have bulk purchase discounts that we can leverage for all customers. And then the innovative technologies that we use through the home upgrade program can also be leveraged for advanced designs for the rest of our customer base. Our home upgrade program, should I stop for questions or continue on? Any preference?
Keep going.
Thank you. Our home upgrade program, we just recently went to the board with a contract amendment for that. It was fully subscribed at 200 customers, and we added money to the home upgrade program so that continue throughout this year and a bit into next. But we really have a bigger vision for home upgrade version 2, which we'd like to include in the RFP. The main components of that are to scale to whole home. We don't know if that means every single project, but most projects should be whole home electrification. These are all low income projects. Increase the number of homes impacted per year. Ramp up to capture federal and state incentives, integrate with our turnkey offering for others, and develop a virtual power plant, which can help with cost savings, and also deal with peak load events. When we talk about scaling to a whole home, from our cost analysis, that'll be roughly $30,000, $32,000 per home. And then we are aiming to target 250 homes per year. This is the minimum to enable a dedicated workforce. There's about 250 work days in a year. And that could mean dedicated plumbing, electrician, and HVAC crews that are spending time on our project specifically. And that aligns with our targets in the 2035 analysis. A little about capturing federal and state incentives. The federal incentives could come, this is from the Inflation Reduction Act, could come as early as late 2023, though it looks like that'll be closer to early to mid 2024. At the same time, the CEC Equitable Decarbonization Funding is being launched around the same time. These are both going through the California Energy Commission. That's why the timeline isn't exact, but the incentives are really good and robust per home in the Inflation Reduction Act, but the bucket isn't that big. So capturing them early will be important. We expect them to run for about a year to a year and a half before the funding's exhausted there. I'm just going to go back to, so the Inflation Reduction Act is $10,000 per home. Using Flex Market is $2,500 per home. And then the decarb funding is $600 million currently. We don't know how much that will be per home. To give an idea what that could look like in terms of funding capture, I have Flex Market from CPUC, the Equitable Building Decarb funding, and the Inflation Reduction Act funding opportunity here. We think there's about $10 million that we could potentially capture at that 250 homes per year rate. And then closing up on the timeline, what I have shown here at the top line is the RHA contract amendment, which just went through. Home upgrade moving, bless you. A one-stop shop being developed and then continuing to be iterated on. An RFP process we'd like to go through this year so that on by Jan 1, a program can be launched that'll include turnkey installation and a hotline. And then other components of building electrification V2 continuing to be grown. You can see at the bottom here, this is really aligned with our expectations of when the Inflation Reduction Act and state incentives will be available. We really want to be ramped up in time to capture those incentives. And that's my presentation.
Okay. Questions or comments?
So I was speaking to a couple of my constituents who told me they were trying to do, like, get into the Bayland rebate. Now, what they were finding was that the contractors were upping the price to install by the amount of the rebate. So in other words, the rebates aren't going to the homeowner, they're basically going to the installation people. What do we do about that?
Through the chair, Rhode Island Director of Energy Programs. I'm sure you can hear me. So we have through our incentive program today, a track that allows people to go through day rent and capture those incentives and the PCD incentives as well. And in October, we added a non-day rent track, so people don't have to go through day rent. In most cases, those are DIY project or project where a customer wants to select their own contractor and it's on day rent list. We have been hearing that costs were higher, there are fewer contractors in the day rent program. There's frustration with some of the contractors in the day rent program. And preliminary data does suggest that the project costs were higher if the contractor was going through day rent. We don't have enough data yet for us to say that with certainty, but it does appear potentially to be true. So our first answer there has been to provide an alternative.
Other comments?
Yeah, but Blake, in terms of the whole house electrification approach, that does not include solar, correct? It's just you're gonna convert everything to an electric appliance, but solar is not anticipated to be included in that, correct?
Correct.
Right, so for certainly low-income folks, well, for everyone, that's going to mean an increase in your electrical costs, right? And it really, in the long run, only makes sense for people, particularly low-income people who sometimes cannot take advantage of some of the rebates, but some of these rebates actually are cash in nature. So I'm just wondering whether we can think about how we might be able to help folks bundle the solar piece. I mean, I have plenty of friends in Portola Valley who have done really, really well by changing their, I don't know, 2,000 watt system to a 20,000 watt system, because now they have the roof space and each panel goes as high as 450 watts and they're doing really well, right? And they're doing too. But other folks, so anyway, it's just enough, something for us to think about maybe, Blake.
Well, let me take that a step further, because I think that's a really important comment. In the three assumptions that you laid out, Blake, which were key, you said the three areas were, I don't want to choose, I don't have the time, give me someone to do it, just get it done, and I can't afford this. I get that, but I think there's a fourth, which is I don't want to take the risk. And the risk being, I mean, we're seeing it in states when the lines go down either because of the risk of fire or the consequences of trees falling and taking out the lines, and people are 100% dependent on power and the power is gone, our grid doesn't address that because it's above ground, and it creates a risk, which I think right now we're seeing people take on electrification because we're giving them cost incentive, but also they're early adopters.
Yes.
And as we get deeper into this, we're gonna see real serious resistance from transferring current buildings to 100% electrical, both because electricity rates are so high and the cost is so significant, which you've addressed, but also because there's a risk. And I heard there was a deep discussion on this at a DAI meeting, where if we're focusing on low income, there's a benefit to them because we're enabling them to electrify, but there's also a risk, which is if the power goes out, who gets hurt? And so what that raises for me, the issue of not just solar, but solar plus battery backup. And frankly, it's two things. And this is in your future RFP, which is solar and battery backup, but another option is community solar. So some way that we can give protection to our customers who we're electrifying, but we don't want to put those people into an unfair, a disproportionate risk. And particularly not because they're low income. That would be a really bad thing for us to do. So I just think we need to think through that. And I do think there's a fourth concern, which we haven't maybe faced in spades yet, but I hear it from residents who are thinking about electrifying, which is they're very resistant to the risk. Yeah.
Rick, I was just gonna tack onto that, say, some of the comments I actually had for item 4, but I think that's absolutely a fourth thing on the list. I also think while we should absolutely be looking at low income people, I mean, the last couple of weeks we had days of no electricity in Atherton and East Palo Alto, right? And while we should be looking at low income people as well, I mean, we should be looking across the board, because I'm hearing from a lot of folks in the middle who are doing okay. They're maybe not like, your friends said they're doing okay, but they're facing these same things. Like, I own a property, the water heater went out, my tenants need water right away, need heat right away, and so we just went out and bought the replacement gas furnace. So anyway, I think that's good point, but then I also want to uplift that sort of looking even at folks for whom any kind of a hit like that is going to be financially tricky. 100%.
Yeah, I mean, and this community solar thing is basically the virtual power plant concept. It's a real issue, and it's really an important issue. And we've got a commitment to generate local power, which we're doing in our first and second segments with public entities putting solar on them, but that's only at this point addressing 10% of our goal. And if we could generate more power that's going to be there, even if the line goes down, and I'm not exactly sure how that works, but we think we need to think it through. It's a big deal.
It's not too late to put that in the RFPs, right? Something about that.
Well, no, but it's a cost issue solar plus batteries is a big cost.
Yeah.
It's not even available.
Yeah, and it's tough to get right now.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, maybe I can offer a quick
And then
comment.
I'm gonna take public comment after this.
And we absolutely will be looking at batteries, particularly in PSPS territories. That is part of what we're thinking about. We of course, currently already have the program with Sunrun for solar plus storage for non-income qualified participants. But there's clearly still a challenge and a gap there. And part of our goal is to start getting a handle on the costs and look how we can bring them down, because right now battery systems are really expensive and difficult to get. So we don't want to overpromise our near-term capabilities there.
Great. I'll come back for more comments from members of the board, but let me take public comment. Diane Bailey.
Well, hello there, board members. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. My name's Diane Bailey. I am commenting as a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee. We took up this issue at our meeting last week and made a couple of recommendations that I wanted to share with you. I was actually here on a different item and Blake asked me to share some of these with you. The CAC is extremely enthusiastic about the Building Electrification 2.0 programs that staff are presenting to you. We wholeheartedly support these programs. We had a couple of recommendations we wanted to share in terms of the $1 million of funding for the zero interest loan program and furthering that. We support that, and we look forward to future budget discussions to make sure that there's ample funding in place to move forward with the full suite of BE 2.0 programs. As far as our specific suggestions, I think these will go in the staff report to the board. So I'll just try to lift up a couple of things briefly for you. With the current work that RHA has completed for low-income homes, we hope that there could be a little bit of a lessons learned from the current homes. I think most have gone incredibly well, but we want to make sure that the program can improve over time. One lesson learned is to make sure that operating appliances are never disconnected before the new ones are ready to be connected. That's just a quality of life thing. Even though these appliances are free, we want to make sure that the homeowners are happy with the service. There's been a lot of talk about the need for emergency replacements for water heaters and furnaces as well when they fail. And we think the 1-800 hotline is urgently needed. I think SMUD, the Sacramento Municipal Utility, provides a great example of how to create an emergency replacement program with devices ready to roll so that 1 day or maximum 2-day installations can be completed and that no one is without hot water or forced to make a choice of a polluting device instead. A couple of other, how am I doing on time? A couple of other suggestions, just real briefly. We want to make sure that there's sufficient capacity available of the best devices, things like 120 volt heat pump water heaters. Right now, those can be on back order and you might need to wait months for those. And so we really recommend that some of these devices be purchased in bulk ahead, both to reduce the costs and also make sure that there's ample supply available. And that goes back to that emergency replacement option and the 1-800 number as well. We want to make sure that there's enhanced customer satisfaction as part of the program. We know that Bayron has tried really hard to provide energy advisor services, and sometimes this can be helpful, and other times we're hearing reports that it's just not sufficient. So we hope that some of those existing programs can be kind of enhanced for use in our territory. And we're also hoping that alongside that there's some tracking of energy bills. For instance, heat pumps can dramatically reduce energy bills because they're so much more efficient. But in some cases, they haven't been installed well, and we want to make sure that households receiving electrification upgrades are not seeing increased utility bills. So that monitoring is really crucial to make sure that the program's performing as advertised. And then we want to make sure that contractor work can be guaranteed and that the quality of the products that are selected for the program are high quality, that have good reviews, and customer feedback is in ample supply online, so we can make sure to avoid the products with negative reviews as part of the electrification service. And then one last thing that I neglected to mention is making sure that materials about the program are available in multiple languages. I think that there are efforts ongoing, and we just wanted to encourage that, especially in North County, where more languages are spoken, that communities, that are non-English speakers are included in these programs and encouraged to apply, and that means translating some of our materials. One more.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Okay, great. Gladwin D'Souza.
Good morning, members of the PCE board. I'm Gladwin D'Souza from Belmont and a former member of the CAC. Thank you for this one-stop shop and turnkey approach. When we started talking about building decarbonization in this like 2018, 2019, we had talked about taking like a IKEA approach to the building electrification upgrade. This is where in the Netherlands, for 2,000 euros, you got a kit, and there were contractors that were supplied by the government that come out and upgrade your house. And that's a much faster way to get to 1.5 degrees of warming the approach we take, sort of the custom approach to every house, is like the 100-year approach to reducing emissions from buildings. The second thing, in my neighborhood, when the power goes out, you can hear it go out because the diesel generators come on. And low-income people have to, breathe the PM 2.5 and whatever else is coming off the diesel generator whilst having their food go bad and not being able to access power for medical needs, asthma. The machines that you use to get clean air during fire emergencies and other things. So I think taking this behind the meter approach to solar plus batteries is within the purview of Peninsula Clean Energy and should be looked at within the larger electrification. Thank you.
Thank you, Glavin. Is there any other public comment? I don't see any public comment in the room and none online. Okay, further comments from members of the board? Anders.
Thank you. It's great to see this electrification 2.0. And I think one of the most important part of the success of this program would be a robust community outreach, as some of the public comment has stated. First of all, I think I've spoken to many of the people who live in my city. While everybody knows that PG&E has delivered their power, right? Not everybody knows that PCE is the one who actually supply the electricity today. So, as I was seeing some earlier slides, they were thinking about, maybe about 200, 250 homes on doing electrifications for them. I mean, we have 260,000 households here in San Mateo County. So that would be 0.1% in terms of scale. So the takeaway there is to use this not only to benefit those 250 homeowners, but also use as an opportunity to put PCE on the map. Get everybody to know that we have these programs available for them. And not just only changing the water heaters to heat pump, but as well as telling everybody the benefit of using water heaters. So everybody else, the rest of the 250,000 households can also get the message and see the benefit of it. And hopefully, make a bigger dent, right, in trying to move this initiative forward. They also talk about the multilingual access, which is also important as well, being able to reach everyone in our county. So I think those are some of the things that initially comes to mind.
That's great.
That's good.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I just know that I really like the emphasis on the one-stop shop website, can be the online, the hotline. It's just so difficult for people to get their heads around how to do this. So those type of tools will go a long way to facilitate things.
Okay, great. Thank you, Blake.
Thank you.
Let's move on. The next item on the agenda is a discussion of the BACMed proposed amendments to Rule 9.4.
Okay, this is my item that I am bringing to you today. So we at Peninsula Clean Energy have an approach to take a position on these rules that are being proposed in the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. They're going to be voting on these on Wednesday, the full board. And these proposed amendments regulate NOx emissions from residential and commercial water heaters and space heaters. And essentially, if you they're applying a zero NOx emission standard, which essentially means the appliances would need to be changed to electric. And it would require that retailers, wholesalers, installers, at the point of time when someone installs a new appliance or replaces their appliance, that they need to meet this. And the timing for this is for residential units would be required to comply by January 1, 2027 for water heaters. For space heating, residential and commercial space heating appliances would need to comply by January 1, 2028. 9. And then larger commercial and multifamily water heaters would need to be complied by January 1, 2031.
Can I ask you a question?
Actually, if we can go to the next slide, please.
But let me ask you a question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's that the households and businesses aren't obligated to comply. What the Batman rule would do is make the NOx generating appliances not available for sale
Right.
in the 9 counties.
Right. Which essentially means that you need to
Well, but it doesn't do, it doesn't require replacement of what you've got. It just says you can't buy that appliance in the county.
It says it can't be sold or installed in the Bay Area, so you can't go outside of the county, buy that device and then have it be installed, that would be against the rule. So,
Okay,
yeah. So. I
that's
just-
different than what they told me when I was at their meeting.
Protection.
Yeah.
So what's the, I'm sorry, what was the?
No, the
actual
issue is
answer?
whether people could install the appliance that you can't buy in the 9 county district.
And Janet's saying no.
The information that I have, the one-page fact sheet, and that's in your pocket. You have right here for you,
Yeah,
at the bottom, it says the rule amendments apply only to new appliances and do not mandate retrofitting existing appliances. But in 2027, only zero NOx water heaters can be sold or
Or
installed in the
okay.
area. 2029
Right.
renters,
Okay.
2031 commercial. So, so we
Okay,
had a
that's good.
discussion, yeah, internally about this. And so we have a platform, within Mitchell Clean Energy Platform, policy one, which states that you have delegated authority to me to take positions on legislative and regulatory items consistent with our regulatory and legislative platform. And one of the items in that platform says to advocate for and support policy efforts to accelerate decarbonization of the energy sector of transportation and the built environment. And so I feel that, you know, these two rules do that part of our platform. And other CCAs have submitted letters of support to the district for reading these two rules, the CCE, these EBCE. These rules, and I wanted to bring this for discussion to you here, the executive committee, before submitting for support. So I feel that it would be in keeping with our goals, with our objectives as an organization, that we would support this. But because there is some controversy around this, I wanted to bring this to you to make sure you're comfortable with that. Some of the other things, there are some off-ramps, as it were, to this. So 2 years before the compliance date of any of these standards, the Air District staff would be bringing a report to the full Air District board about whether zero NOx appliances are available for residents, what the costs are, what the infrastructure readiness is, which I would also attribute to being, you know, whether PG&E has gotten their system to a point that they can support the increase of the electrical load. So we will certainly be able to procure sufficient power to meet these things. And it'll be, you know, it'll be a gradual change as these appliances get implemented. And then there also will be an implementation working group of external stakeholders who will be informing the Air District staff about the issues for the interim report that the staff will be bringing to the board. So I think there are sufficient policies there, or there's sufficient safeguards that go along with this rule, so that if, you know, these kinds of appliances aren't really ready and aren't cost effective at that time, that the dates could be pushed back. Anyway, I'll, happy to answer any questions and open the discussion from the chair.
Great, Don?
Sure. So I can appreciate that we comply with our thing, but given we just had a 30-minute discussion about all the challenges and the issues, and also the fact that we don't have, I think the most vulnerable people in our county are the coastsiders, and we don't have anyone from the coast sitting in this room right now. I'm a little concerned as an executive committee without hearing from, you have Moon Bay, Civica and supervisors that have, you know, Dave, you're not, I'm sorry, I know you represent them, but I think you know some of your colleagues have concerns. That I guess I don't know that writing, I'm not really that comfortable writing the letter on behalf of the whole board, because I just don't feel like the whole board's here to represent it, and we don't have time to take it to the full board. So personally, I would just say, we don't have to write a negative letter, we don't have to write a positive letter, we just don't have to write a letter, and you know, we've had this presented, I'm sure it's probably gonna pass, sounds like there's off ramps, but I think there are really big concerns around this as well. I've heard from a lot of my constituents, huge concern on this, and I guess I just don't wanna give anybody a reason to be aggravated with PCE and then get mad and opt out. I wanna keep people in the tent. I don't want to give them any reason to get out of the tent. That's my personal opinion.
Other comments? Julia?
Yeah, I was gonna hear what other folks had to say before I chimed in, but I'll just go ahead. You know, I in no way, obviously, I think this is, you know, it falls along the, you know, our goals. You know, I think this is where we should be going ultimately, so this is not an anti comment. I am a little concerned, and the same comments we brought up for item 3 sort of apply here. It's unfortunately very bad timing, I think, just given where we are right now, the amount of people in the county, like I said, in all communities who've been affected by some of the electrical outages. And so while I think, you know, again, I'm not sure exactly, I'm interested to hear what other folks want the letter to say. I think if we had to write a letter, I mean, we could have some caveats or some carve outs, maybe it wouldn't matter to the air district, that saying that these are some of the concerns that we have, and we're not sure exactly how we would address them even to our you know, ratepayers that have, and that we, you know, something to that effect. I think there's a post, but also, you know, as we said, I mean, I've seen some numbers, you know, thrown out about the cost, and I do worry about that, again, for low income folks, but also for middle income folks, seeing here a few $1,000s is still a hit to their incomes. So I think the off ramps are useful, but I think it's very bad timing, unfortunately.
Right.
So I share the same concern. I feel that the full board should be able to participate in this discussion, and just the timing isn't really the best right now.
Let me make a comment. The issue is whether to support our CEO to write a letter related to a regulatory matter, and we have a policy that this is inconsistent with our strategic goal of decarbonization. I definitely think we shouldn't write a letter in opposition to this.
Correct.
That would be, I think, against what we're focused on. I think that notwithstanding that this is consistent with our strategic goal of decarbonization, it raises some real issues which you guys have articulated. For me, it makes me think, I remember 2 years ago, we had a big discussion about a board policy decision, and and I felt, and so did a few others on the board, and some felt differently, that to take a very controversial position, I would want to first get some direction from my council, since I sit here as a representative of my council, and this hasn't come up before the council, and we don't have time to bring it up before the council. And nobody suggested on my council that it come up that we take a position on it. I think it's more appropriate for PCE to be taking a position on this because it's consistent with our strategic goals than for probably any of our councils, although some of them may have taken positions on this. But it sort of raises that issue for me. And I don't have direction from my council on it.
Well, Commissioner, before we the public, just out of curiosity, is it a, and I think we're all agreed that it does comply with our goals and but is there an option to write a letter? Is it just in favor or not in favor?
Well, I don't think we have to write a letter. I think that Donna said it when she commented. I mean, it hadn't come before our board. There are a couple CCAs that have written letters. It didn't go before their boards. They just wrote the letter.
If I could respond to that, then we can write a letter and, outline what points we think are important to consider. So, and, that was part of the ask as well from us, just been talking to some people out at the Air District, that they're interested in what our suggestions might be as well. So.
What are the value in that?
Yeah, one option would be to write a letter saying this is consistent with our mission as an organization. However, these are the things that we appreciate you considering.
Well, let me take public comment. Carlos, go ahead and then I'll take public comment.
Sure, so the California Electric Code will be updated twice by the time this actually gets implemented. So 2 iterations from now, we ain't gonna be seeing much gas. We may not see any gas 2 iterations from now, to 2027, okay? However, what this does do, it cracks the biggest nut we have in terms of electrification, because it deals with existing installations, right? The electrical code at this point, I think is like it's new construction. Are we gonna get to, and I don't know how you might know better than I, are we gonna get to it's blanket for everybody in 2027? This does get to, and it's middle-class people, low-income folks who are gonna have to wind up buying. I assume water heaters are gonna go down significantly in the next 6 or 7 years, right? They're just gonna be, nobody's gonna be making those other ones. And everybody, so they're gonna get economies of scale. And you'll save a couple, but I can tell you, you can DIY in East Palo Alto, and you do it all the time, a new water heater for less than $1,000, less than $1,000. You can probably do it for $700, right? So there's no way that you're gonna be able to do these for $700. But I think if we want to address the issue of retrofits, right, we're gonna have to go with something like this. It's not equitable if you implement it today, period. It's just way too expensive for, even middle income folks, right? I mean, if you have to pop $22,000 for a furnace, right, when you could basically get a new furnace for about $8,000, right? So I don't know. I think between now and then, we're gonna have to figure out how we can, one, those prices drop, but also how we can, help people do this change. But I think this is a necessary change. I just don't know how else we deal with the retrofits, that's the vast majority of what we have out there.
Okay, let's take public comment and then we'll bring it back to the committee. Diane Bailey. And please keep your comments to 2 minutes.
Thank you. Diane Bailey speaking as a private citizen and scientist, and having been actively engaged with the Air District rulemaking for the past 4 years. I'm very disappointed to hear your discussion today. I think it's colored by a lot of misinformation, and that's unfortunate. And I think if you look at your constituent comments on the record, on the docket, you'll find much more support than any concern. So that's too bad. As you know, this is a very important rule. There are tremendous air quality and health benefits. Gas appliances contribute to much more NOx pollution than all of the cars in our region. And when implemented, the rule will avoid up to 85 premature deaths each year and tens of thousands of asthma cases. So on that alone, I don't understand how that can't be supported, given the off-ramps and the safety features of this rule. The climate co-benefits are substantial, and the rule is completely in line and supporting the electrification work going forward at PCE. The co-side issue is really a red herring. I think you all know this in your hearts. There's a lot of misinformation. When it comes to power outages and rural resilience, yes, there are concerns about these outages, but also please note that gas furnaces simply don't work when the power is out, and neither does your refrigerator. So obviously we need to work on resilience, but that's entirely a separate issue from these standards. I wish that you would consider and fall in line with SVCE and East Bay Clean Energy. This rule will help you support your electrification goals. And as you know, all carrots and incentives alone as an approach to electrification simply does not work. We need clean air standards. These save lives. And I hope that folks can get over the politicization of these rules and look at the facts at hand and vote for clean air and health. Thank you.
And thank you, Diane. Gladwin D'Souza.
Good afternoon, members of the Peninsula Clean Energy Board. I'm Gladwin D'Souza, and I'm the Conservation Chair at the Sierra Club, speaking here on behalf of the Sierra Club. We applaud the rules from the district that have the potential to significantly improve public health, as outlined above, and in additional areas outside the scope of the analysis. I agree with Diane Bailey that these issues are well known, and we should take them into account when we talk, especially an electrical entity like Peninsula Clean Energy. A co-benefit of reducing and eventually eliminating the use of gas is the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And we know quite a bit about carbon dioxide, but we don't really know much about methane and nitrous oxide in their effect on global warming. We know they are a lot worse than carbon dioxide, but we don't measure them in terms of their overall impact and what kind of feedback loops are occurring that are worsening the climate crisis. But we do know that low-income communities are the victims of where these climate disasters are appearing. Gas extraction, transmission, and distribution processes result in several percent leakage of toxic gas into the environment. Along the way, the public is exposed to toxic components of fossil gas, including benzene, a well-known carcinogen, and other poisonous gas. And you've seen data recently from Stanford talking about the effect of natural gas in the household, resulting in asthma and other reasons. Asthma, by the way, is the #1 reason why children miss school and why low-income neighborhood schools end up losing out on federal funding. So thank you for reevaluating why you are not supporting this rule.
To be fair. No, I was just gonna say that, yeah, I don't, is public comment closed? There might be Is public comment closed?
I have to pay attention now.
There might be more public comment.
Is there any other public?
There's not.
Okay, we'll close public comment, bring it back to the committee.
Thank you, and I appreciate the public comments. I think there's a little bit of a mischaracterization of our discussion. I think we all, you see all kind of, it looks like there's I'll just be really quick. I think we did all agree, it sounded like, for consensus, that it's absolutely fits. In fact, I tried to make it a little spiel before my comment about how we absolutely support this, and this is absolutely, but I think it is, since we're talking about it, worth mentioning a few things, and including, while I think there's a lot of health benefits to getting rid of eventually of gas furnaces and the like, that there's also some, cost issues to think about, which is also part of people's health is, being able to afford things like, going all electric and all the other things they have to pay for. So I just want to make sure that that's kind of resets the stage a little bit. We are not saying right now that we're opposed to this at all. We're just trying to figure out as a group here how to manage this letter. The other thing I was going to ask is, did I miss something? Are there some sort of, is there some sort of financial something that is being, that BACnet is offering at this point? Something about grants or something like that?
There aren't any particular grants that they are offering. However, there are, under the Inflation Reduction Act, there are incentives for installing these types of devices. We at Peninsula Clean Energy also are offering incentives for these devices. And we also know, just from the experience with the REACH codes, that having an ordinance, having a requirement that something happened will make things move more quickly rather than the, just a voluntary decision by a family to install these types of devices. So if we want to rely only on the voluntary market, as Carlos noted, that's I think it was you who said that's a 100-year approach, someone said that. But if we put it into an ordinance, into a rule, then that will definitely move the market, create the market demand for the products, get the prices down and things like that.
And we at PCE, if we wanted to put more money into programs that help subsidize, we could look at that too, since we could, yeah.
And I think we're also, we're certainly looking at backup power and battery storage, and trying to work with PG&E to, we haven't made any progress on this yet, or really started on this yet, but there are other CCAs, Redwood Coast being one example, who did like a microgrid with PG&E, where a portion of the grid can be islanded in the case of the power going out, and having some backup storage there so that people can continue to get their power. So that's kind of something more in the future that we would want to work with them on. And yeah, so reliability of the grid, the distribution system.
Okay, so let me just pause for a second here. I missed one public comment, so I'll take that and then bring this back. And then I'd like us to give direction to staff on whether to send a letter or not. But I want to raise a question. We're afternoon. We've got one more item on the agenda, which had been intended to be discussed at our February meeting and wasn't. We can either take it today, in which case we should expect we'd be here until 12:30, or we can put it off and take it at the next month. It's 100% of the committee staff is okay either way.
I have a hard stop at 12:30.
But are you willing to stay till 12:30?
12:30.
I can do 12:30.
Okay. Let's take public comment on this from Tim Frank, and then we'll close this one off, and then we'll move on to this policy 10 issue.
Oh, terrific. This is Tim Frank. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And are we still talking about the rules 9, 4, and 6?
We are, yeah, you've got a little over a minute and a half.
Perfect. So, no, I just wanted to note that there actually is an opportunity for collaboration between the Air District and local agencies, because they do not have responsibility for some of the actions that are necessary to turn that rule into actually an improvement for air quality, because the grid itself is not decarbonized yet. It's really important to focus on the full suite of things that you can do to make sure that you're getting energy efficiency out of this. And that ranges from making sure that there's actually proper installation. So to the extent that you can actually incentivize programs that will ensure that people who have the skills to do the work, do that work, then you can have greater efficiency. You can also capture the greenhouse gas benefits of making sure that you have properly sized units, you have proper installation, and you have proper maintenance, and ultimately proper decommissioning to make sure that the refrigerants never escape into the atmosphere. And the workforce component of that, making sure that people have the training to actually do all that right, is really important. And you have a greater role to play in that than does the Air District itself. So it's just another reason to take a very close look at your own programming and make sure that it measures up to the standards it needs in order to make sure that this turns into a positive. Thanks. Oh, just by way of introduction, I'm representing the Bay Area Building Trades.
Great, thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is the pleasure of the committee? That the issue here is to give staff direction on whether or not to send the letter. And the letter can both be positive and state qualifications as Jan articulated.
Change to, it's going to be difficult whenever it occurs. And I think that it's going to be very difficult on consumers. It's going to take a while for the market to catch up. I think it needs to happen. I'd be in favor of a letter with the qualifications. It's haven't particularly.
Maybe those qualifications should include some of the issues Julia addressed, which is how do you afford this? Otherwise, like Carlos said, it is a $14,000 cost to put in a heat pump water heater, not water heater, but space heater. And I agree 100% with what Carlos said. I think that these 120 volt water heaters are going to go way down in price because they're going to be they're going to be cost effective. I'm more concerned about the space heating, and this is 100% both. And I don't know, I'm not aware that, I mean, I know there's the Inflation Reduction Act, which is going to be a benefit for the next year and a half, but this rule isn't going to go into place while at that point. This rule is going to come into place after that. And Batman needs to do something to address the financial situation, and I don't think that's been proposed. Donna.
Yes, so I agree. It's, if we send a letter stating that this complies with our goals of, decarbonization, I would specifically want to call out our concerns around affordability, reliability of the grid, availability of product, which it really hasn't been. I mean, I've been trying to get a heat pump water heater in my house. Can't, takes forever, can't get backup battery storage. And then, we should call all that out. And specifically, I think we should call out the concerns over, lower and middle income, as well as our coast side, which just experiences, very strong grid unreliability. And if Monterey County, I've been monitoring things down there, they've been 7-8 days without electricity. There's a tree's fallen on the electrical lines and PG&E can't get out and fix them. So those are as much as the framework of it is lovely and beautiful, the reality for people that are actually trying to do this, and I'm one of them who's trying to electrify my entire house, it's like the hardest thing I've ever done. It is not available. So I do think we need to call all that out and say, we have concerns and here they are. And we're concerned about all the things we just listed. And, maybe Jan, you could run the letter back by Rick, just to make sure you got it.
Why don't you run the letter by Don?
Happy to do it. Yeah, you just gotta.
And I'm available, so if you're not available, I'm available.
But I mean, I don't think this is, I agree with Julia, this isn't about not supporting this. We all understand that this is the way we're moving. But my constituents are very concerned, and what I'm concerned about is that fine line of tipping where if we push this too hard and we start to really upset people, the result is they go back to PG&E. They just say, I've had enough with you, I'm going back to PG&E. And I've had people in my community tell me that's their solution to it. Like, we're just not going to support you, we're going to go back to PG&E. And I don't want to, I want people, like I said, in the tent and part of the solution, I don't want them to feel that we've not listened to them. Is that true?
So does that work for everyone?
Through the chair, can I just say one last thing? I think that it sounds like from what Jan said, that the Air District actually welcomes letters that are in support with some caveats or with some of our concerns listed. So to the extent that this is, and especially for some of the public commenters, that's, if that's what we agree today, that's what the letter will say. It supports our mission and here are our concerns, which I think is very reasonable.
Okay, let's move on.
Thank you.
But by the way, I agree with Dave. There's gonna be pain in this, in making this transition. It's, you know, do we take the pill today or do we take it in 4 or 5 years? And I think we need to start. Yeah, it's gonna hurt, but yeah. So I'm in support of that, but I think I would also be in support of just saying, let's just send it in support of it, even though we know it's gonna impact a bunch of folks.
Okay, so we're moving on to item 6, which is strategic plan amendments or proposed amendments to policy 9 and 10. I just want to be cognizant that we've only got 15 minutes on this.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
shake that.
Yes, great. I'll be quick with my presentation and then leave time for questions and public comment. So we can move to the next slide. I'm having my notes here on the screen. So for background, we'll frame this in the area of the DEI scope of work for our overall DEI project. We'll then go through proposed edits to the three different policies that I'm bringing before you today: strategic plan, policy number 9, which is ethical vendor standards, and policy number 10, our inclusive and sustainable workforce policy. So we can move on to the next slide. So the DEI scope of work had 5 key tasks that our consultant worked on with us starting over a year ago. The first task was to review relevant DEI legislation and regulatory requirements, which has been completed. The second task was to conduct a DEI organizational needs assessment, including survey and interviews, which have been completed. The third is to create an organizational DEI policy, which was completed and approved at our October 27th meeting last year, board meeting. Task 4 was to update relevant organizational policies, and this includes our strategic plan, employee handbook, policies 9 and 10, which is what is before you today. Employee handbook edits are still in progress and will be presented at a later date. And then task 5 is also still in progress, which is regarding a DEI action plan. So to implement departmental goals, metrics, to operationalize DEI throughout the entire organization. So moving on to proposed edits to our strategic plan. Our consultant is proposed edits to the organizational excellence pillar of our strategic plan. We have 6 pillars to our strategic plan: organizational excellence, financial stewardship, marketing, outreach and account services, community energy programs, public policy, and power resources. We anticipate making more updates to the strategic plan at the key tactic level during implementation of our action plan, but these updates are at a staff level and do not require board approval. So what we're seeking board approval on, an executive committee recommendation of board approval on, is this minor edit highlighted in red to our organizational excellence pillar of our strategic plan. So essentially working in the full acronym of diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion to this pillar. All right, moving right along to the next slide. Proposed edits to policy number 9. This policy was originally approved in November 17th, 2016. The current title is ethical vendor standards, and the proposed new title is ethical procurement standards. And so most of the policy has been added, except for the section before you that is ethical vendor standards, which is part of the new policy, but we have expanded it to include staff's procurement conduct. So that is I'll go more into that on the next slide, which you can move on to, Brianna. So the proposed revisions added sections regarding to sustainability and social responsibility, transparency, confidentiality, impartiality, professionalism, compliance, and accountability. And so previously, as I mentioned, it was a 2-sentence policy on vendor standards, and we added these sections, and this closely mirrors San Mateo County's Code of Ethical Conduct, their procurement ethics. So we did borrow heavily from their policy when drafting policy number 9. All right, moving on to policy number 10. Some more immediate edits here. This policy was originally approved on December 15th, 2016 and updated on October 25th, 2018. Just going over some of the policy revisions. We updated formatting and added numbered section headers for easier policy navigation. We reformatted reformatted the policy statement under section 1, primarily restructuring language that was already included in the original policy, and also included the proposed revised organizational excellence goal from the strategic plan that I referenced previously, and reference to the recently approved policy 22, diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. We revised item 4 in section 2B, supply chain, to request information from, can someone mute themselves? I think I'm getting some feedback. Sorry. Revised item 4 in section 2B, supply chain, to request information from suppliers and contractors of their status as a minority, woman, LGBT, disabled veteran, or persons with disabilities owned business enterprise, rather than collecting information on inclusivity of their workforce, which is addressed in item 6 of this section. We revised item 6 in section 2B, supply chain, to encourage, not require, reporting from developers and large vendors on inclusivity in their business staff. We removed reference to business ownership from this item, as that is now addressed in the proposed edits to item 4. So we made this edit primarily for clarity and to reduce redundancy. We added attachment A, supply chain code of conduct, to the policy, now referenced in item 7 of section 2B, supply chain, and that attachment was included in the agenda packet. We added, sorry, I lost my place. We're gonna move on to the next slide, attachment A, supply chain code of conduct. Great. So we added this attachment A, sorry, let me grab some water. Talking fast has me choking a little bit. So these standards are derived from the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and the core conventions of the International Labor Organization, including the ILO Declaration of Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, and the Solar Industries Association commitment to environmental and social responsibility. So the full detail is included in your agenda packet, but there's several sections of this supply chain code of conduct, including freely chosen employment, forced, bonded, or indentured labor, involuntary or exploitative prison labor, or slavery or trafficking of persons is not permitted within our supply chain. Young workers, child labor is not permitted in any stage of manufacturing in our supply chain. Working hours, to set maximum working hours per week and time off every week for employees within our supply chain. Wages and benefits, compensation paid to workers shall comply with all applicable wage laws, and there shall be overtime compensation. Humane treatment, there shall be no harsh or inhumane treatment, including violence, abuse, punishment, coercion, bullying, or public shaming. And non-discrimination, non-harassment, that suppliers should be committed to a workplace free of harassment and unlawful discrimination. And freedom of association, suppliers shall respect the right of all workers to form and join trade unions of their own choosing. In restricted jurisdictions, suppliers shall not manufacture or produce products in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region of China. It is believed that manufactured products within that region are presumed to have made with forced labor. Moving to the next slide, proposed edits to policy number 10, continued. We added the city of Los Banos and Merced County and Central Valley to section 2C, inclusive business practices, since we did expand our service to that service territory. We added the city of Los Banos, Merced County, and Central Valley when defining local in section 3B, sustainable workforce objectives. And we modified language in section 3D, Peninsula Clean Energy owned generation projects from shall require to shall use best efforts to require. Previously, when the executive committee heard this item back in January, we only made that change to the second to last section of section 3D. Executive committee suggested we modify the entire section to be consistent to shall use best efforts to require, and also directed us to meet with local union labor representatives to discuss that proposed language change, which I will get more into in my next slides. And then we modified the apprenticeship requirement in section 3D to better comply with Inflation Reduction Act requirements to receive full tax credits. And so previously I made the change from 20 to 25% in section 3D. Upon further research, we decided to reference the Inflation Reduction Act requirements, specifically in Notice 2022-61, which do not necessarily mean a 25% requirement. So we decided to keep in our 20% requirement that was previously within the policy for apprenticeship requirements, and then reference the IRA guidance specifically. Moving to the next slide.
Through the chair, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm so sorry to interrupt. I have a really hard. Is there any way, can I make a motion to maybe, and I know we have a lot of public commenters, can we hear public comment and then?
Well, okay, I was going to let Shana.
I'm sorry.
We have two options here. We've got enough public comment that's going to go until 1 o'clock. So the option is, we could cut out policy 10 and we could take policy 10 next month. I think most of these comments are on policy 10. Or we can stay here until 1 o'clock. So
I suggest we continue the item.
sorry,
If I may, if we're going to continue the item.
stay here.
Continue the
Continue the item to the next meeting.
Okay.
Given the
continue item to
public
next meeting.
comment that.
And we would need to put it on first, we need to put it first.
Yeah, okay. So, the committee wants to continue the policy 10 discussion until next meeting. Do you want to address the other changes or just continue the whole thing till next meeting?
I'm fine with addressing, well, okay, I'm on the DI subcommittee, so I'm fine with addressing the others, but
We've got 3 minutes.
So I'll pause then, if that sounds good, and so we're continuing policy 10 till next executive committee meeting, and then considering approval of strategic plan amendments in policy 9, is that correct?
Yeah, we'll do the strategic plan and policy 9, and if we lose Julia, because you've got to go, we're gonna lose you.
I gotta go too. I have other stuff as well, so that's why I didn't want to interrupt, but how many of us are going to lose 4? How many have to leave at 12:30? I just.
We was wrong.
Okay. Well, we're gonna have to continue the whole thing.
Just continue the whole thing.
Okay, I know we've got 7 or 8 public comments that want to comment on this, but we're basically at the 12:30 time. We don't have the time to continue, so we're gonna continue the entire item until the next month.
Chair, is there a motion to continue the items?
I'll make a motion.
Andrews,
I'll second.
motion, and there's a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so we apologize to everyone from the public that wants to give public comment. We just didn't have time to address this, and we definitely want to hear your public comments, so please come back next month and we will address this issue.
Or they can write to us.
Pardon?
Or they can write to us.
You can absolutely, you can send in your public comment in writing, and we will have it for the next month. But if you'd like to address us verbally, we absolutely want to hear you. We're sorry, we're just 30 minutes past our meeting end time and people have to go. Okay. Any other comments from anybody on the committee? Okay, motion to adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.